Hi everybody, Father Bill Holsinger here, and this is your Friday Reflection. Well, I don't know if you've watched Father Dominic's last video he offered about war and peace. He kind of gave a 30,000 foot view of the whole issues that we struggle with today. Again, war is nothing new, sadly, but I'm not sure everybody understands some of the principles. And I've spoken about them in the past, I've even written as well, but I thought maybe what I'd do is I'd dust off the old catechism here and help us to kind of understand a little bit more about it. So I'm going to read you probably a good section of this page and a half of the catechism, starting with paragraph, let's see here. Well, it starts at, there's a whole section here on war. Let me get it for you here. Hard to turn pages here. Here we go. There's a whole section on avoiding war. I can't really see that. Avoiding war. And that's on paragraph 2307. So I'm going to start there. And I'm going to move all the way to probably, 2314. So that's a good chunk of a page or so. So I'm going to do my best to read it to you, maybe make some commentary. But ultimately, this is giving the principles of what just war is, or you've heard of the just war theory. And it goes into, of course, we want to, first of all, avoid war because of the killing that it does. And war is always an evil, sometimes a necessary one, but we don't want to ever get there. But here we go. This is paragraph 2307. The fifth commandment forbids an intentional destruction of all human life. Pretty clear there. Because of the evils and injustices that accompany all war, the church insistently urges everyone to prayer and to action so that the divine goodness may free us from the ancient bondage of war. Paragraph 2308. All citizens and all governments are obliged to work for the avoidance of war. However, and this is quoting Gaudium et Spes. The Gaudium et Spes, by the way, is a document of the Second Vatican Council. But I'm just quoting this. It says, however, as long as the danger of war persists and there is no international authority with the necessary competence and power, governments cannot be denied the right of lawful self-defense once all peace efforts have failed. I suppose that's where some of the controversy may be. Again, this is where the church sets out these principles, and of course the details have to be worked out by human beings with their prudential judgment. But let's keep reading. Paragraph 2309. The strict conditions for legitimate defense by military force require rigorous consideration. The gravity of such a decision makes it subject to rigorous conditions of moral legitimacy. Now here we go. This is the principles, the points of a just war theory. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. Here they go. At once and the same time, not just one or the other, all have to be the case, the damage inflicted by the aggressor on the nation or community of nations must be lasting, grave, and certain. Again, that's lasting, grave, and certain. Next, all other means of putting an end to it must have been shown to be impractical or ineffective. Next, there must be serious prospects of success. And the final one, the use of arms must not produce evils and disorders graver than the evil to be eliminated. The power of modern means of destruction weighs very heavily in evaluating this condition. Let's keep going. The evaluation of these conditions for moral legitimacy belongs to the prudential judgment of those who have responsibility for the common good. And that would be our government leaders, because they have the power to use lethal force or military action. We can apply some of this to our neighbors, maybe. Let me think about this. So let's suppose a neighbor has thrown some of their garbage over the fence and onto my property. Now, I may say, well, what am I going to do about that? I may decide I'm going to throw it back over their fence, and because I'm angry, I'm going to take some more of my shrubbery and clippings and throw more of it over theirs. So now they have more than that they had. What might they do? Well, then they're going to throw it all back on my yard, but also on top of that, they may throw a lot of other things, and maybe even prickly things, maybe like barbed wire or whatever. They're up in the game. So it makes it very difficult to deal with. Okay, so what am I going to do? Well, I may not be able to deal with that prickly stuff, so there it sits. So then I might want to then throw some kind of horrible thing over the fence on their side. Maybe colored dye, or maybe some kind of thing that would be dangerous to people. And that could harm my neighbor. Maybe actually their neighbor gets harmed. And maybe it's one of their kids. In which case, that neighbor gets even more angry. And that neighbor then throws over on my side something even more dangerous. Maybe there's a hand grenade. Maybe he throws that over and waits for me to show up before he throws it over so that I get hurt. And suppose I get hurt, then maybe my family then gets mad, and then they decide what we're going to do is we're going to attack them. And so what they do is they break into the backyard and attack all the neighbors in their backyard. Maybe hurt and maybe kill some. Their family now is mad at my family, and so now it's an all-out war. And my response on my side of family could be, well, I'm going to throw a whole bunch of bombs in their backyard, blow up their entire house. And their response may be, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to throw a nuclear weapon in their backyard and obliterate the entire block. Okay. We hear from Jesus. He says, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye and for a tooth. That wasn't justifying any kind of violence. I think people take it that way. Actually, it was trying to minimize the escalation of kind of like what I just illustrated. He said, of course, you've heard it said this, I tell you, love your enemies, do good to those who hurt you, pray for those who maltreat you. If they slap you in one cheek, turn and give them the other. That doesn't mean you don't need to be a doormat, but there's kind of an interesting thing here as I have understood it. This, for example, the example of slapping one's hand or slapping one's face. This would be very rude to slap someone's face. Normally I would slap it this way with probably my right hand and I'd hit them on the face here. But then slapping them on the second time, the other side of the face is even more rude. But what happens? Then everybody sees it. And the injustice is made known and seen clearly. And of course the aggressor, which would be me in this case, would be shut down hopefully and stopped from doing any more harm. Anyhow, let's move on. Paragraph 2310 says, public authorities in this case have the right and the duty to impose on citizens the obligations necessary for national defense. Those who are sworn to serve their country in the armed forces are servants of the security and freedom of nations. If they carry out their duty honorably, they truly contribute to the common good of the nation and the maintenance of peace. Paragraph 2311. Public authorities should make equitable provision for those who, for reasons of conscience, refuse to bear arms. These are nonetheless obliged to serve the human community in some other way. So, I suppose someone doesn't want to bear arms. Maybe they can serve in the medical profession or something else if there was a big war. Paragraph 2312. The Church and human reason both assert the permanent validity of the moral law during armed conflict. The mere fact that war has regrettably broken out does not mean that everything becomes licit between the warring parties. Back in chivalry time, there were some rules of war. And the Church is saying, it's not all out, just do whatever. And here's some examples. Paragraph 2313. Non-combatants, wounded soldiers, and prisoners must be respected and treated humanely. Actions deliberately contrary to the law of nations and to its universal principles are crimes, and as are the orders that command such actions. Blind obedience does not suffice to excuse those who carry them out. In other words, someone could be asked or told by a commander to do something that was unjust, and they'd have a moral righteousness to refuse that order. Thus, the extermination of a people, nation, or ethnic minority must be condemned as a mortal sin. This is not a small thing. One is morally bound to resist orders that command genocide. Paragraph 2314. Every act of war directed to the indiscriminate destruction of whole cities or vast areas with their inhabitants is a crime against God and man, which merits firm and unequivocal condemnation. A danger of modern warfare is that it provides the opportunity to those who possess modern scientific weapons, especially atomic, biological, or chemical weapons, to commit such crimes. So there's more here, and I encourage you to read more about this. Again, in these paragraphs 2307 to paragraph 2313 or 2314. So I leave it to you. This is the thing. This is how this goes. We've had cardinals speak their minds in very specific ways, but at the same time, I've said the details of how to work some of these things out, we can't know specifically. However, there have been some great injustices that should be looked at and stopped. And they spelled them out. CBS News, 60 Minutes actually had a recent, I'll put a link in this video, had a great reflection by 3 of the cardinals here in the United States. This is complicated, and people may vary or differ on some of their calculations of how to understand whether this is a just war or not. But our cardinals and the Holy Father are clear. The war in Iran is unjust. We ourselves then need to pray. For me, it drives me closer to seek out those who I'm with and to serve them more. Like today, I went to see someone who was dying, and that was important for me to go because I know who this is a human being, and this is my local area that I do have control over. I want this person, this woman, to die with dignity and to receive the sacraments for her salvation. The question might be then for you, what is it that you are going to do that would help change the climate to a more peaceful one? I think the Pope also recommended that we contact, and you might want to contact, legislators or people in that kind of area to let them know what you want. We're a republic and a democracy. This is something that you can do. So I don't think this is very often that you hear that much of the Catechism specifically around the theory of just war, or the just war theory. I spoke about this at OCIA, those who are joining the church. This is one of the areas, there's a night where we talk about sticky issues or issues of controversy, and I went through these things, and it's important that we use those principles to then discern in our own conscience whether something is just or not in the case of these, like in the case of war or the Iran war. Now, all of that said, if someone comes up to you and wants to harm you, we heard you have a reason, a legitimate reason for self-defense, but it must be of a proportion that doesn't cause greater harms. In other words, if there's a way that you can stop the aggressor, that would be your first stop. So, think about these things. This is the just war theory, the Catechism of the Catholic Church. I encourage you to read it, to pray over it. The footnotes really dig into what's called Gaudium et Spes. You can read that directly if you want to through the internet. Look up Gaudium et Spes. I'll put a link in the show notes again, and so that you can ponder on this. It's important that we educate ourselves, but inform our consciences, not with what political leaders are saying, but what the church says, what the law of God says, what the scriptures tells us, what the Catechism kind of summarizes for us. This is how we can firm up and understand things better, by having informed consciences and then acting on those consciences. This weekend, Deacon Brett is going to be preaching, and he's kind of looking at this story of the road to Emmaus where disciples were leaving and Jesus comes upon them, and he then speaks to them and translates to them all the scriptures that were referring to him, because they were downtrodden. They thought this was going to be the Messiah, but they didn't know he was in their midst. Somehow he was mystically disguised. And then they had a meal, and he broke bread with them, and then their minds were opened. I love that. So that's what we've been talking about today. This is Wednesday, when we were typically at the church. We will reflect on the scripture, or whoever's doing the homily the coming week, the ideas that they're roaming around, and we'd have this discussion. And what does that mean? What does it mean to have one's mind open, or to see new or differently. I know what it is for me when I look at my telescope. I can see some amazing things with special tools that kind of open the skies for me. But here we're talking about the law of God and the love of God. When we receive, and I know for myself, when I've received Jesus into my heart as a younger person and recognize how deeply loved I am, everything changed. My priorities changed. Things that were maybe distasteful or boring, like Mass, all of a sudden became mystically very powerful for me, soothing, comforting, and giving me, let's say, courage to be a Catholic Christian. Let's pray for Deacon Brett so he can offer a homily that we need to hear, because that's, I think, the most important thing for us when we hear a homily, not just what we want to say, but what it is that we as a community need to hear. In the meantime, God bless you, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.